Well, the Washington Commanders could be returning to RFK, of course. Many of you have questions about this pending deal. Joining me now is Professor Melinda Roth from George Washington University. Professor Roth, I wanted to go ahead and start with you today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Simone.
Yeah, let's dive right in. We got a lot of ground to cover. So the Commanders, right, they've reached this agreement to build at the site where RFK Stadium is. That was their home from 1961 to 1977. Of course, it still stands. It could cost about $4 billion. I'm curious, with your financial background, talk about what this deal means financially for D.C.
Well, it's complicated, and I think people have to be able to understand that we being DC, are not just trying to bring the Commanders back to DC. We're sort of competing with our neighbors in Maryland and Virginia. And so for the estimated $4 billion cost, $2.7 billion has been agreed to be financed privately by the Josh Harris ownership group. And that is a huge amount. And in fact, it's likely a much higher amount than he would have to pay himself were he to be lured by Maryland or Virginia.
Interesting. Really interesting perspective, actually, when you put it in that framework there. What are the biggest legal hurdles the Commanders and the district face in just trying to make this deal a reality?
Well, that's a very good question. So part of it is a very tight timeline. Although the stadium isn't supposed to be constructed and open until 2030, the exclusive deal with DC that has been negotiated is through July 15th. And DC Council needs to therefore approve of it before July 15th, which, is only a few months away and might be a very tight timetable for them.
Okay. I'm curious, what kind of lease or ownership model would you expect for the new stadium, and what legal implications might come with it? I don't know if you can shed light on that.
So I think the current plan has the 180-acre RFK campus divided into 6 districts. And one of those districts would be a stadium district, which, by the way, the Commanders would not be paying taxes on, but there are these other districts, some of which would be developed, for example, into a residential community of about 5,000 to 6,000 residential units, including up to 30% affordable housing, which would actually be huge for the district.
I was thinking back, and maybe you can shed some light on this, but what are some success stories in the U.S. when it just comes to how new stadiums or arenas impact the areas they're built in? I specifically think of Vegas and the Raiders and how that really even boosted the economy in that region. But anything come to mind for you?
Well, much of the research, of the financial and economic research, shows that stadiums are notoriously not necessarily a great financial investment for cities or states. However, we don't really need to go far to look for success stories. We can look to both Nats Park and what relocating the baseball franchise from actually RFK to a different part of town did for that part of town. And we can look to what happened when the Wizards and the Capitals were located at what is now called Capital One Arena. You can just walk around either of those neighborhoods and you can see residents, you can see businesses, both restaurants, bars, hotels. You can see thriving parts of our city. And if you go and look at where RFK stands and just close your eyes and imagine that part of the city would become an attraction with not just the stadium, but all sorts of other hotels, restaurants, bars, and even, I think, something that's been overlooked, a sportsplex for youth sporting events, not just an outdoor one, but also an indoor track that would also be able to hold gymnastics competitions. So the concept of locating a youth sportsplex in that part of the city where, I coincidentally have done a lot of work with the Fort DuPont Ice Arena, it is fantastic for the residents there to think of the other amenities and the jobs, of course, that will be created.
Okay, I wanted to talk more numbers with you because, we usually hear civic leaders, team owners Talking about the positive financial impacts of new stadiums being built, I'm curious how true or exaggerated those numbers, might be. We were just talking recently in this press conference. The owner, Josh Harris, was estimating that it could be billions of dollars across 30 years' time that this new stadium would bring. And I'm wondering, do you think those are exaggerated? Are they inflated? What do you think on that?
They are typically inflated numbers when owners and or cities or states try to speak about the specific financial benefits. I think they've said that it's going to bring in something like $4 billion in taxes and about $16 billion in direct spending. And while they may be exaggerated, it is fair to say that right now RFK is showing pictures. It is vacant. There's 180 acres there, and I can think of nothing better than bringing the Commanders back to where they had previous success. I think while there is opposition, I think, sports tends to unite people and bring people together, and the Washington Commanders belong in Washington.
Anything else you'd leave our audience with before we have to let you go?
I do think that the worries about the cost to taxpayers are also equally exaggerated, just the same way that the benefits may be. And one of the things to look at is there is some research right down the road in Baltimore when Camden Yards was built. And the estimate is that it cost the average local households about $15 a year to build Camden Yards. And I think most people would be able to stomach the concept of $15 a year. Now, that is not what is going to happen in DC. The way that they're potentially going to finance this is fairly creative and really wouldn't take money out of the pockets of DC taxpayers. But it is still a choice and an opportunity cost that DC is making. And I think one of the ways to really sell it to the opposition are all these other benefits, including the affordable housing, the youthplex that I mentioned. I think the campus is going to stay 30% green space. There's all sorts of other benefits beyond just bringing the NFL football team back to DC.
All right. Professor Melinda Roth from George Washington University, thank you so much for your time, for the conversation, and for your expertise on this. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right.